Everybody, and welcome back to Mortgage Talk and More. I'm your host, Mark Hairston, and I hope everybody had a joyful Christmas. I know we took a little bit of time off, and we're back here in early January. Really excited about this subject today that's going to be important. So stay tuned. Make sure you stay with us because this could literally save you lots and lots of money. So my guests today are Margie Berciano. I knew I was going to blow it.
Yeah.
It sounds like Smith, and then Craig Hancock, and we're going to get into a little more detail here about your background. But before I get started, I want to say that as a mortgage broker for 37 years, as a small business owner, one thing I've really understood over the years is our job is to identify pain points in people's lives and help solve them. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we are going to talk about a pain point in people's lives, including my own, that Craig and Margie are going to talk about solving for us today and how they can save us some money. So before talk about a little bit about your background, Craig. We've met. We've never met. I saw you on a webinar about 9 months ago, and I said, this guy really understands what he's talking about, and I need to talk to him more personally. And I thought maybe everybody else would like to hear your story too, or what you do.
Yeah, well, Mark, I appreciate you having Margie and I here. And sure. So I kind of fell into the property tax industry about 4 years ago. My background's more in data and technology, and I started in that endeavor back in the Air Force.
Okay.
Doing the GPS satellite system, which is one of the world's largest data systems that trades time and location all over the world.
All over the world.
Yep. So.
That was in the military?
That was in the military, yeah. I did about 5 years in the Air Force, mostly in California, some in Colorado.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your company is what?
So our company's Home Tax Shield, and we founded the company in 2020 after we saw how many homeowners in the state of Texas were not accessing professional property tax services. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the largest unserved markets I've ever uncovered. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole slew of reasons why it's unserved and kind of uncovered at this point. But I, as a homeowner, I firmly believe that everybody should have access to a true professional that can help them with this very complex topic that comes around every single year.
Yeah. And the complex topic really is around property tax.
Yes.
And challenging, if you will, appraised values with the county. Would you say that in a nutshell? That's what we're going to be talking about.
It is, and the common phrase is, I want to protest or appeal my property taxes. You actually don't protest or appeal your taxes. You protest or appeal the value of your home that's used to calculate your taxes. So yes, the county's by law is responsible for coming out with your value every single year.
Yep.
That's the value that ultimately determines your tax. And that's the value that you can appeal and protest to make sure that the county gets it correct.
Well, going back to my pain point in my business, one of the pain points about people trying to get a mortgage loan is the amount of property tax they have to pay. Yeah. And it's really challenging, tough on qualifying, number one. So the lower we can help people reduce that burden, the better off everybody is.
Absolutely. And the last few years in Texas have been, on one hand, really great for the real estate market because the values have gone up. But for the folks that got mortgages 3, 4, 5 years ago and forecasted and planned on a certain tax rate and tax amount for their home, and now they're caught with a home that's worth 2x or more, and their taxes are 2x or more. Right. It puts a big pinch on people.
Big time. Yeah. And Margie, tell us a little bit about your background.
I've worn a lot of hats, but I pretty much came as far as real estate from the title background, and as well as I go way back to when I ran for office in 2014.
Okay.
And was an ambassador when they were doing the Code Next to rewrite it.
Oh, yeah.
So I have stayed in that conversation and continued to work through the Land Development Code Committee with ULI. So this was just a good, and followed the protesting and everything that has to do with home and value and property. Stayed in that conversation with various real estate professionals.
Great.
And
you do have somewhat of a political background too.
I do.
Yeah. You have a love for that.
I do. I stay very connected to that.
That's great. That's great.
But really, all of it has always been, even when I got involved with the land development code situation, was to be that voice of reason out there. Because when you're in the forest, you don't necessarily know how to explain it to everybody coming in.
Mhm.
And just like with the protesting and tax, what does that really mean? What does it take to get there to meet your objectives and your goals? Well, same with good land use.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I've stayed in that conversation. But
And that's really kind of a different. It's part of this conversation for sure, but
Mhm.
that could be a conversation of its own too.
it is
You know.
because they're in battle right now about changing homes.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
but yeah, that's definitely for another
That's
time.
for another time,
Yeah,
but
but
that's
there-
really important in
Yes.
Austin, Texas, for sure. You know,
Yes.
because I know a lot about the mortgage space,
Mhm.
but there's parts of real estate that I'm just not that up on. That's why I have you guys
I
to
kind
talk
of feel
about.
like it's like that constantly, a little juggling the putter. But so for me with Craig, a mutual friend of ours who was getting into tax protesting, he actually buys and sells businesses too, helps people
Mhm.
do that. And we continued to have a conversation through a networking group.
Okay.
They do work.
Mhm.
And so we had stayed connected and continued conversation. And he bought a small tax protesting company. But he said, Margie, I really think I think you could do this.
Yeah.
And so, but he is not in a position to take me on, but having conversations with Craig, and he had been doing my taxes since like 2020.
Property
And
tax.
when they
Mhm.
started, I let them do help me on appealing my taxes. So I put it all in his hands,
Mhm.
and I would have him do webinars for
Mhm.
the contacts I have in real estate through title, and we just continued a dialogue. And I made a decision, talking to a number of other professionals in tax
Mhm.
protesting, that this would be a good tool in my belt to have.
Sure. Sure.
And
I love it.
so,
Mhm.
and Craig trusted me to bring me on to get the word out about what we do, how we do it,
Well,
what makes us different in the marketplace, which is
Yeah.
really important. People need to understand what is the difference between each of these tax
absolutely.
protesting companies.
And we want to dig into that right
Yeah.
now, as a matter of fact,
Yeah.
because when I saw you last year on the webinar, Craig, I thought, he has a differentiated value. And like you said something a minute ago that really struck me. You said something about the market being wide open.
Mhm.
That everybody out there in Austin land or wherever in Texas can use your services
Mhm. And should. Yeah.
and should. So that's that's a big thing. So let's talk about it more. Let's break it down. Kind of give us the tax appeal. We're talking about property taxes, ladies and gentlemen. We're not talking about IRS taxes or anything like that. Just property taxes.
Right.
So
Yeah. So I do have there's an analogy on the IRS tax side of things. We all, on that side, we all file a return
right
every year. Right. And you do that to make sure that you and the government communicate about what you made, and so that you pay a fair tax every year to the government. Not filing a protest or an appeal on your home value is kind of like not filing a return with the IRS and letting the government guess at what you made and tell you what we're going to tax you
That's
on.
a great analogy, man.
So yeah, but it is obviously very different than the IRS. But that's how we see the appeal and the protest process. It's your right and ultimately responsibility from a financial standpoint to make sure that the government is taxing you fairly. And homeowners, thankfully in Texas, homeowners have a voice in that system. No taxation without representation, like our country was built on.
Right.
And that's the protest process. But like we were talking about before, it really all starts with the value. And one of the confusing parts of the system is the fact that there's actually 3 governmental entities involved in property taxes. There's the appraisal district, which appraises the appraisal value for your home.
For the county?
For the county.
Okay.
They're all county entities.
Got it.
County appraisal district determines your value. The county tax assessor assesses your value and sends you your tax bill.
Okay.
That's a whole separate office.
Okay.
And then there's the county recorder that records your deed to record who legally owns the home. So there's really kind of three different entities.
Got it.
So, but collectively, everybody kind of refers to them as the county.
Yeah. That's what we call it.
Yeah, that's right. So, but going back to that value, one of the interesting things that that I found about like really diving into this and where a lot of the confusion lies in property taxes is when you look at your home's value, a lot of people think, well, Zillow says this or
Mhm.
Realtor.com says that, or my realtor says this. Well,
Mhm.
there's actually 10 different values for your home that are all different.
10?
10, all different
I didn't know that.
and all correct. So it's a really
Wherever seat you're sitting in.
what it depends on what the use of the value is for.
Got it.
Right. And so buyers have their own value, sellers have their own value.
That's for sure.
The market transactions happen. That's when buyers and sellers meet.
Right.
You have insurance value, you have cost replacement value, and then when you get into the tax world, you have about 4 values that are all related to property taxes. And so the fact that there's lots of values involved in your home, when everybody thinks of, I have one value for my home. What is it?
Right.
It's not really true. So when we talk about property tax values, how the county arrives at that and how we will protest or appeal that value is very different than all the other values in the list.
Interesting. It's kind of like interest rates. People say, "What's your rate today?" Well, rates are lots of things.
It depends.
It depends.
I know we
That's
all
a great
need the
answer.
hats that go,
Yeah,
it depends.
It depends. So what we're seeing a lot of right now, at least in my world, is that people are contracting on properties less than the county's assessing them for from last year.
Yes.
So you're going to be very busy this spring, I promise.
Yes.
So tell us, let's say I came to you with my properties and say, "Hey, Craig, I want you to look at these deals. What do you do? Tell us about how it works and the value you bring to the table."
Yeah. So that fact that you said that transactions are happening now that are oftentimes below where the county had them at last year is another very confusing aspect of this business. And it's simply stated in that the county appraisal process for property taxes will fall behind the actual real estate market by anywhere between 9 and 18 months.
Okay.
Always behind.
I know there's a lag. I wasn't
There's
sure how long.
always a lag.
Yeah.
Whether the market's going up and the county's trying to catch up to the
Right,
market,
right.
there's a lag. And when the market goes down or slows like it has now, there's a lag.
Yeah. So they keep going up, it seems like, on values.
And
Yeah.
values are going in.
Yeah.
In
But-
most places.
Yeah.
They're still up.
But we're still seeing some
on
prices on
average.
contracts a little lower when we look at the tax assessment,
Right.
Yeah. So
So-
they're not, and maybe they go up 3.4% versus 35%.
Yeah.
But they're still going up.
Well,
Sure.
and even if they go down, so even if the big question for this coming April is, do the counties recognize that the values are either flat or down and then give you a flat or down value?
Mhm.
And even if they do, based on the data, then the question is, did they go down enough? And so, we often have to answer the question, why do I bother protesting? I think I got a fair value. It looks fair to me. Well, you don't really know until you actually try to go protest it and either succeed or fail.
Right.
And so
I wouldn't recommend going by myself to do that. Personally.
have you before?
No, I never have.
Yeah.
But I've heard enough stories around that I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hire you.
Yeah.
As a matter of
Well,
fact.
And that kind of talks about the myths
Yeah.
around doing that, but why you need to hire us too.
Yeah.
And
The point is, I guess, before we get further into this, is that anybody could protest their own taxes or appeal their property value,
Right.
I guess. But
Right.
unless you
Yeah.
know what you're talking about, you're probably not going to win. That's my
Right.
guess.
it just depends.
I mean, yeah, I
mean,
guess you could if you're
Mhm.
very proficient or whatever.
Before we go on, it's really critical and people to understand that we don't have extensions in the protesting world.
What does
If
that
you
mean?
don't file it by May 15th,
Okay.
Yeah.
you are sunk till the following year, where a lot of people don't pay attention and they want to slam us like by
In June or something.
or somewhere like, can you help me? Can you help me? Or they file on their own, but they're not getting anywhere. And then suddenly they want
too
us
late.
to jump in. It's
Yeah.
too late. We can do nothing. They either do it, we do it, or nothing gets
May
done.
15th.
May
And that's why I
15th.
wanted to have you in January.
Yeah.
So let people know this is important. and there's deadlines. There's a lot of money on the table here.
Right. And it
Right.
You
has
know?
nothing to do with the taxes they're paying right now. Taxes are due by January 31st.
Yeah.
But the appeal process has to do with what's going to be valued and what they will get at the end of this year.
At the end
For
of
their value.
2024.
It's
right?
already done for what they're paying this year.
That's right.
If they didn't protest, they need to pay that amount.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
And you also help people with exemptions, understanding how that works, like homestead and
We do,
disability.
especially
or-
just from an education standpoint.
Yeah.
So the only two ways that you can keep your property taxes low and or reduce them are through exemptions and then protesting.
Mhm.
There's technically a third way that nobody likes to talk about, which is you can move to a cheaper house or a state that doesn't have property taxes. You technically
Right.
can do that
Right.
too.
Right,
but,
right.
but in terms of where you're at, like it's simply, get your exemptions filed if you qualify for any of them. And there's a lot of good ones. And then make sure you protest every year.
So let's get back to the protest
Yeah.
methodology or strategy.
Yeah.
You're an analytics guy, obviously.
Absolutely,
So you like
yeah.
numbers and you like models of study and whatnot. So share us with, kind of what you guys do on a day-to-day basis,
Sure.
and how it works.
Yeah. Well, I do. I love data. This is that's what got me into this business. It is one of the most interesting and large and complex data problems and challenges from a real estate industry standpoint in Texas. I find it fascinating. And then in order to understand how to approach the protest or appeal process, you really need to dissect how the county's appraisal process functions first.
Are they changed from county to county? In other words, is Williamson County different than Travis
Great
County?
question. So yes, it can actually change. Now they are all beholden to the state law that governs how within the confines of an appraisal process, how where the guide rails are. Okay. So
Okay.
there's an overarching appraisal process guideline that the state set forth for all counties, but within those guidelines, each county can kind of do it a little bit their own way.
Okay.
As long as they stay within those guidelines. So we do see a lot of similarities between counties,
Mhm.
but every county has a little bit of their own kind of special approach, or how they treat pools versus how they treat garages versus
Mhm.
land versus
Interesting.
all
I didn't
sorts
know
of
that either.
things. So it is not one answer for the whole state. And so to do it well and to do it right, you really need to dissect each county's individual appraisal methodologies and approaches
Okay.
in order to understand how can I be successful in protesting or appealing what the county came up with.
Got it.
So that's one of the kind of common homeowner misunderstandings is they look at their value on Zillow and they say, well, I can you just give me that value? That looks like a fair value. But
Mhm.
how Zillow arrived at that value is
Good point.
incredibly different than how the county arrived at even if the numbers were the same, the process by how they get there is incredibly different. So you have to bring your expertise into their process in order to change their process.
Got it.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference also on resale. If you go to resell your home, if your property taxes are relatively low, then that's very attractive to a buyer,
It can be.
compared to be where it could be,
Yeah.
if you don't take care of your business,
Right.
Even my middle boy bought a house over here in Cat Mountain years ago. And a few years later, I was just looking up some stuff online, and he hadn't even filed a homestead exemption.
Mm.
I said, son, you're wasting a lot of money.
Yeah.
So he did that.
Big
But
time.
people just don't know.
Yeah, that's a couple $1,000 per year right off the bat
Right
for,
off the
for the
bat.
average homeowner.
Yeah.
Is if you don't file your exemption, you're leaving a couple $1,000 on the table.
And you talked about myths a minute ago. Share some of the myths, if you will, about this world.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the interesting ones. A lot of people that do file the homestead exemption, which is great, feel like, well, I'm protected by the exemption, so I don't need to protest, or I can't save any more money by
Mhm.
protesting. And the interesting thing is when you look at the calculation of your taxes, your property, we have a great infographic on this that we just created. And the protest part of the calculation for your taxes actually comes before your exemption is applied. So that means that you can take you can get benefit from your protest and then also apply your exemption, your homestead exemption. So a lot of people incorrectly think, well, I've got a homestead exemption, I don't need to bother.
Yeah.
And it is helping them save a lot of money.
It is, because there's maximums the county can move your property value up if you have a homestead. Is that
Correct.
correct?
It's 10%.
10%.
Yeah, per year.
Has there been, and we talked earlier before the show about maybe some legislation around other forthcoming tax benefits from the state.
Mhm.
Can you share some of that too?
Oh, can I catch you real quick?
Yeah.
Yes, there is a cap. The value doesn't necessarily have to change, even though there's a cap. That's just a cap of what they're going to charge you tax wise. So
Right.
that's all the more important to protest, so that you tap down your value to meet what you're paying.
Yeah. So if property is
That's not
valued
an
at
automatic.
$500,000, they can move it to 550 the next year,
Right.
even though your property may have come down a little
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
bit. And that's, like I say,
So
this
sorry, I
spring
wanted
you're
to
going to be,
catch
you
that
guys are
real
going to be
quick.
busy. We're going to
Yeah.
promote this deal. All my
Yeah.
clients for sure.
Well, that was one of the big legislative changes that that the state passed this past year, and the homestead. So there's a cap on the homestead. That's one piece on of value on the homestead. Then there's the actual exemption, which is the amount of value that you're exempt from paying.
Okay.
That exemption used to be $40,000. It used to be $25,000.
Okay.
And 2 legislative sessions ago, they raised it to 40, and then this one they raised it to 100.
And that's in 2024,
2020. It actually applied in 2023.
2023. Okay.
So
Got
people
it.
that had the homestead exemption in place in 2023 are paying are getting that $100,000 credit effectively
Yeah.
on their taxes, which if your tax rate's around 2%, then that's $2,000.
Yeah.
So
That's a good point. Is that across the board on all taxing entities, school district and county?
another good question. That every county taxing entity is allowed to by the schools by law have to accept the homestead exemption.
Okay.
The other taxing entities can if they want, and they can also kind of change how much they give you. So, but the big one is the school
Sure.
in your county has to give you that credit, and it's a big. So it adds up a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in October, I'll be 65. So,
Congratulations.
yeah, I get Medicare and I get to freeze my school taxes. Is that right?
You get to freeze your school taxes, and that's another misconception or myth is that once I have the over 65 exemption, I don't need to protest anymore because my
Mhm.
taxes are frozen.
Right.
That's
a myth.
partially true. The school taxes are frozen, and the school taxes are oftentimes half of your overall tax
Yeah,
bill.
probably.
So your school taxes are frozen, but all the other taxes are not frozen.
hmm
So all the other taxes can still go up with.
And
your
what
value.
are those typically? County, city?
County, fire, road, sometimes
Mud.
water, muds. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's so interesting is how the tax rates change from the area to area too around Austin.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know,
Oh.
we've been in some places of 1.9 and some places at 3.3.
Yeah. I remember when I first moved back to Texas. I grew up in Katy, Texas, outside of Houston. But when I first moved back to Texas, we landed in Lakeway.
I live in Lakeway.
In a particular area of Lakeway, that the tax rate was 1.83%,
Yeah, yeah.
which was fantastic.
It's crazy.
Versus some other areas, even around Lakeway or around Austin, we're up at 2.4%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And a lot of people don't think about that when they're buying a house. They just say, oh, I like this pretty house. You know, well, what are the taxes on it?
Right.
You know, I have a home in Lost Creek that when we bought it was not in the city of Austin,
Mhm.
you know, and it was 1.9. Now they annexed us into the city. Now it's 2.3 or something.
Right.
So they really hammered us on.
Well, and
property
all those
taxes.
taxing entities are, come up with their budget for the year to provide the services to the
Sure.
county, and that's how that rate is determined, and then it's all rolled up. And so a lot of times when the rates want to get raised higher than a certain threshold, they have to go to the voters. So that is another irregular time when you can keep your taxes low by voting against things
Right.
if you don't like the services or want to keep
But
your
we
taxes
lost
low.
that.
Yeah.
But we don't have a lot of time left. This may be a second conversation. We'll have to have you guys come back because this is a big, important point. But what else can you share about any myths that people may have some takeaways on this thing?
Yeah, I think the big one that I'd like everybody to understand really has to do with the very common comparison somebody might make to their neighbor. And
That's a good one there because I look at my neighbors too.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of that.
And it makes perfect sense why you would do that. You know, my neighbor's house is a lot like mine, but they are taxed lower. Why? Well, why am I not taxed like that? Right. And you only get the real answer to that question after you dive into how the county's appraisal
Mm.
process actually functions. And you also have to remember that every homeowner has a different collection of exemptions that they qualify for. So there's so many differences between two homes that are seemingly alike,
Right.
both in the appraisal process and in the exemption setup, that it's technically not easy or even fair to compare your home to your neighbor's
Yeah.
home.
It's not.
And that's what frustrates a lot of people about this business, because they, visually see differences in the numbers and they're like, why is this? And it's
Yeah.
maddening. So
Well, before we sign off today, let us make sure we understand how to get a hold of you guys. Your
Yeah.
name, your phone number, your email, however you want us to respond to this, to
so
contact you.
we're very data driven and tech enabled. And that's how we're able to serve tens of thousands of homeowners across Texas,
All over Texas.
all over Texas.
Amen.
And hometaxshield.com is the place where you can go find your home on our website. It's all county data, so it's all public. Find your home, sign up, create an account, just takes a couple of minutes.
Okay.
And in doing that, you have then hired a local professional in your county to handle your case for 2024.
Okay. Fantastic.
And
You got any
it's
closing
very
thoughts there, Margie?
reasonable. For people, you sign up and if you sign up online, it's $30. If you're working with a partner relationship, you can get it 50% off.
Per property.
Yeah.
Yes,
not an account.
for the first year. We also have one of the lowest, if not the lowest rate when we have tax success, savings success, which is 30%. A lot of them out there are 40, 45, 50%
Oh,
that you
wonderful.
pay them if they get it. So that's another bonus. We can do all property types.
Commercial too.
Yes, we have some
Oops, gotta go.
what do you call it? Help.
Well, we've got to wrap it up today, but I've really, really enjoyed this conversation today. I've learned quite a bit myself, and I'm going to do some business. You're going to get all three of my properties here. I'm going
Fantastic.
to sign
Oh,
up
good.
on the website and get this thing going. So thanks again, guys, and we'll have you back soon.
Thank you, Mark. Pleasure to
you.
be with you.
Thanks, Mark.